Good evening, everyone. I'm Sebastian Francis, and I'll be the moderator for this group with Lives at AWS, securing Black, Latino, and Native American small businesses and startups. Today, we'll talk about why we're here, thanks to Vanessa, AWS leadership from Hart Rossman, and customer focus with DiscoveredTV and Iya Foods. We'll also have a session for questions and answers and what you can do to get your partners, customers involved in this project. We'll turn it over to Vanessa. Vanessa, why are we here?
Well, we're here because cyber crimes are very prevalent. It's growing, and a lot of our customers have told us, I'm concerned about the cost of a cyber crime. And as of 2020, cyber crime has cost a lot of customers over $2.7 billion. Another thing is that a lot of our startups and a lot of our small businesses are the low-hanging fruit for nefarious actors, right? And you guys are really busy. You're wearing several hats. You're the CEO, you're the chief marketing officer, you're the COO, and in some cases, you're even the janitor. So we understand that. And that is the main reason why we're here. We're also here because we want to help the underrepresented communities of the Black, Latinx, and Native American startups and businesses and support them.
Vanessa, can you tell us a little bit more about the connection between the data that you presented and helping communities and small businesses? How does that flow from this project to STEM education to communities?
Well, the way it works is what helps to bridge it from this pilot to the STEM community is education. That is the basis. And we're in security. We do security every day. I mean, you don't leave your door open, maybe in some communities, but it's that education that is the true core element that bridges what this pilot does and what STEM does. Because if they see other businesses of color, then they're gonna wanna learn, right? It's like, oh, who is that up there? Who is towing, right? Who's Vanessa talking? So that is part of it.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. Tell us a little bit more about why Lives at AWS. This is a big undertaking. What sparked you to do it?
Well, if everyone could remember, about over 2 years ago, June 2020, to just take you there, that was during the time we were all locked down, pandemic, uncertainty, and also it was during the time when there were a lot of protests and social unrest around George Floyd's murder. And I was on a engagement, and my leadership, Hart Rossman, had asked me a question, and I'm like, oh my God, I've only been with AWS for 6 months, and this is a limiting question. How do I feel?
Thinking big.
Yeah, thinking big. So I said, since I didn't want to lose my job, I said, I'd rather come back to you on this question, on my response, Hart, if you don't mind. And he said, sure, take your time, whatever you need. And so I went to sleep that night, and around 4 a.m., it occurred to me, it said, why am I here? How did I get here? And I got here because my grandfather was a businessman during Jim Crow, and my father was a businessman for flooring, and he had, social unrest. He didn't feel safe in his environment physically, as well as the logical lack of security controls for his business. But we made it, and they made it, and that's how I got here, to be a participating factor in my community, educating and mentoring women in STEM. And so that was the key element. It was the key element of why George was in that shop with a counterfeit bill, because he didn't have the resources that I had growing up in my environment. So I wanted to make a difference, came up with the idea, and I got the support. we do narratives in AWS, and a builder project was created from that. And I became a builder, and I had a really good team of individuals, including you, through this pandemic, even though we had tons of work on our plate to make this into a reality.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. The other thing that I want to ask you is about small businesses and large enterprises when it comes to security. What differences are you seeing?
The biggest difference I see is there's two differences that comes to mind. One is the speed that a small business can make decisions very quickly. You don't have to go to this department. You don't have to do a huge business case, right? That's one difference. The other difference, when it comes to large corporations, they have more of the capital to back innovation, capital to have staff to be present or augmented, whereas the small businesses doesn't. Every penny counts, every mind trust, intellect counts to be on point. Those are the big major differences. And when it comes to security, it all depends on that entity's risk tolerance and what they want to do to secure their main thing, which is their data. And data is gold these days.
Thank you, Vanessa. Next, we have two companies, or small businesses and startups, that's working with us at Lives at AWS. Can you tell us about DiscoveredTV, please?
Yes, unfortunately, Charles couldn't be here with us today. He had a personal thing that came up that his family needed him to be at, and he needed to be there. But DiscoveredTV is pretty interesting. They have a streaming platform where they have artists who are in film, music, or whatever their content of creation, and they display this creation on this platform so they could get discovered. And they also have a retail aspect, the e-commerce part of it, where the artists can sell their merchandise and swag on their platform as well. And the way we engaged them was through doing the well-architected framework. And they were already existing AWS customers, so that they had our media services. So they wanted to understand how can they, keep their costs at a certain point, and we showed them how to do that. And then we went through the well-architected framework assessment. And one of the biggest concerns that the CFO had was so funny. Vanessa, what keeps me up at night is the security of our data. And what if we had a breach? Oh my God, we'll just be out of it. Said, let's talk about that. So it's more of a conversation to dig deep on what their security concerns were and look at their existing controls. And then we made modifications to that. And we also put together a security baseline for them, provided a lot of security best practices, and they were really happy. And they also partnered with Toen's company on what we call the executive security simulation project. They both got a chance to learn from each other. It was fun.
That's very interesting, Vanessa, that you mentioned that. I have a deep dive question for you. We're talking about food manufacturing. We're talking about discovering talent. Is there a difference in the approach when it comes to understanding security?
When it comes to security, everyone wants that data secured. So it doesn't matter what industry it is. Now, there are different regulations around different industries. That's the case, for example, if it was a healthcare industry versus a fintech. But one of the things that is a common denominator is every industry wants their data secured.
Excellent. Thank you, Vanessa, for speaking for Charles. Now, I want to introduce, or I'll have you introduce Toyin and everyone that's out there. Toyin and Vanessa have formed a relationship far before they formed a relationship with me. And all I can hear Vanessa talk about is how good the food is.
Oh, gosh.
It's packaged. People love it. So there's a lead in, Vanessa, if you can do an introduction to this fabulous person and her process.
Yes, when I first met Toyin, because our program we are derivative from the Black Business Accelerator program. So Toyin was one of the people we were going to assess, and we assessed to see if it'd be a suitable match for Lives at AWS. And when I met her, I'm like, oh my God, yes, this should be great to work with. And also I said, let me try her product. So I tried the brownie mix, and my God, my husband is like, where did you get this from? It stayed moist, and then we tried it. I said, well, maybe that's a fluke. So let's try something else. So we tried the pumpkin cake, because he loves pumpkin cake. He's like, oh my God, this is like fresh pumpkin. I can't believe this. And then he decided, oh, I'm gonna grill. He has this new grill. So I'm gonna try some of this seasoning for the chicken that she had. So we went on and he tried it, and now he has this new thing for his buffalo wings. They're Toyin wings.
Oh, that's sweet.
So Vanessa and Toyin, take us home, because we talked about how amazing your food products are. Now let's talk about data security. And so I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Hi,
Of
everyone.
course.
Thank you for showing up. By the way, I love pumpkin too. Fall is my best time of the year. I love pumpkin, everything pumpkin.
Me too.
So I'm going to talk about data, and I'm going to spend some time just telling you a little bit about Iya Foods, the company. I remember the first time I met Vanessa, my first question was, what is AWS? I knew we needed data security. I had been grappling with a big question that had evolved over the number of years I had been, running Iya Foods, and Iya Foods was my fourth entrepreneurship venture. And the question, and I would say this to my children or anybody around me and to myself, is I realized very quickly that it's not the person or the business that creates the value, that retains the value. It's the company or person that retains the value, that retains the value. And data was a big part of that. So the more I started to learn about AWS and what Amazon offers, the more I started to kind of connect all those dots about things that we've been building, data that we've been gathering across the entire ecosystem. And within every ecosystem, going back to the question that Vanessa responded to earlier about how it doesn't matter what the business is, you need to secure your data. Within every ecosystem, there's a sub-ecosystem, and it eventually boils down to data. Whether you're talking about our manufacturing, we're moving into our own 40,000 square foot facility. I'm getting ahead a bit. I haven't talked about the business, but I will in a second. Maybe I should do that first, and I can get back to the ecosystem within the ecosystem and why data security and data accessibility is such an important part of that. So this is the fun stuff. Who we are. We make good food. I like to describe it as good food made with good ingredients. Very quickly, a little bit about myself. I was born in Nigeria, and I moved to the United States about 20 years ago. I'm the first daughter, second child of 5. I like to mention that because very early on, I was involved in my mom's various entrepreneurial ventures. I was the assistant mom, which is very normal in many households. So I always had a focus on food, family, and faith. My faith is really important to me. Now in America, I have 2 I like to say American sons, because there is some divide in cultural divide. I'm kidding. So I have 2 sons, 16 and 13. And the reason why I started with that is Iya Foods started from just me being a mom, because food is a very important love language for me. And I know a lot of immigrant families talk about this, where your parents don't necessarily tell you, I love you. My mom never did, but she would say, have you eaten? She would say, are you hungry? That was her love language. So even though I tell my kids I love them every day, food has always been a part of my love language. So I started by taking everyday African superfoods, and you see a lot of me talk about that through how we gather data, African superfoods, and started making everyday American foods. Because the last thing you want for an immigrant child is to take indigenous food to school. So that's how Iya Foods started. It wasn't just that, it was also my ability to spot trends and to analyze data, because I started my career in private equity before Kellogg at Northwestern, then before working at Bain and consulting for CPG food industry. So I started my life as an entrepreneur, but I started my career as somebody who worked with a ton of data, whether that was through private equity or whether that was through consulting or whether I was in business school. So on top of that, now being a mom, it just clicked that, you know what, we have something here. We can create a business, which leads me to the second bullet point there. There are three main pillars with which we create products. Number one is taste. Everybody knows what that is. Number two is nourishment. I'm a mom. Iya actually means my mother or my loving mother, if you want to expand it a little bit. So nourishment is something that is important to me, for my family, for my children. Number three is where the data need became even more essential. The number three, functionality, as simple as that word sounds, I want to say is probably the single most important factor in our success as a CPG food industry. So I'll tell you what we mean internally by functionality. We mean affordability. We mean the products we're creating, are they intuitive to the average American, to the everyday American, where if you're in Montana, we were talking about Montana earlier today, or if you're in Iowa, or you're in New York, or in San Francisco, even though we're using African superfoods to add an extra layer of flavor and an extra layer of nutrition to the products, is it distinctive to the average American consumer? If you're a CPG food industry, if you're not a grab distinctive, if you don't have a grab instinctiveness to your consumer, you're dead, in your first year. So we knew that was something we had to do. How have we done that? We've used data on what the customers want, data on supply chain, because everybody knows what's going on with supply chain right now with the Russia-Ukraine crisis and with global climate change and global warming. And let me backtrack a bit. This is one of the things that I think a lot of entrepreneurs find out very quickly in business, is the thing you loved that got you into that business, you probably get to do that 10% of the time. There's this entire ecosystem you have to learn. Some of them you've never heard of before, problems you're dealing with that you didn't even know you were gonna have. And that's where data becomes so powerful. Because when I'm talking about functionality, and that functionality cuts across everything, because if you're giving your consumers the right products, especially when it's food in the CPG industry, guess what? Ingredients become an incredibly important aspect of your business. Supply chain becomes an incredibly important part of your business. We are expanding into manufacturing. We're actually currently manufacturing now. We're expanding our manufacturing capabilities and capacity. So we're moving into a 40,000 square foot facility that has more equipment that need to speak with each other, more equipment that is generating data. I didn't mention earlier, but my first degree is in accounting. So I have my pulse on cash flow. No matter what kind of business you create, if your cash flow is not strategic, again, your business is going to die before it gets an opportunity to prove its business model. All of these things is data in multiple layers, in an ecosystem within an ecosystem. That's why I said there's an ecosystem within an ecosystem. For us as a company, we operate in the CPG food industry. Well, that means customer, that's data. That means products, that is data. That means manufacturing, that is data. That means pricing, that is data. That is supply chain, that is problems, that is employees, that is also data. So all of these things all feed into what we're calling functionality. Our products, I should have probably led with that. There's flours, we have cassava flour. Talking about our products, I'll get back to that. One of the things that data helps us realize is, even though I say African superfoods, there are a lot of the superfoods that we use that are grown in many parts of the world, in the Caribbean, in Asia, in South America, in specifically in Jamaica. Some of them even grown here in the United States. I'll use one example: cassava flour. Cassava is a root like potatoes. That's the best analogy of yams that I can use. Cassava is one of the fastest growing ingredients for gluten-free, grain-free in America today, and is grown in multiple parts of the world. But Nigeria, where I was born, is the number one producer of cassava in the world by a mile. Number two is a distant second. So you can imagine being able to access all of that data. You say, what's happening in cassava? How do we monetize that? How do we create foods that our customers would love and pick us over the big CPG brands? Another reason why plugging into AWS became important to us. I love period movies. So when you're talking about movies set in 1800s, 1700s, as long as there's no car, it's horses. I love those kind of movies. I'm going to use that as an analogy. So I like to liken being a small business to being like a 40-man or woman army. There's an African movie coming up about an all-woman army. You guys should go see it when it comes out. I'm excited for that. But imagine being a 40-man or 40-woman army and going up against a 40,000-man army. That's how it feels when you're a small business and you're going against bigger brands. that have a lot of money to mine data, to store data, to access that data in split seconds, for that data to be predictive. That's something you don't have as a small business.
Right.
Vanessa mentioned earlier that when you start out, you're a CEO, you're a marketer, you're a janitor. When I started my business, my mom's middle name is Grace. I created a customer service character called Grace so that I can pick up the phone as CEO Tony, and I can pick up the phone as Grace, the customer service. And then in the evening, I'm Tony and my kids were washing the bathrooms. That is the reality of starting a business. Thank God we've gone beyond that now, but at the same time, we're still a small business. So being able to plug into AWS takes care of an incredibly important aspect of that ecosystem I mentioned earlier that puts you at a near equal footing with the 40,000 man army. And that is incredibly important in today's world. If you're going to grow as a small business, if you're going to compete, you have to find ecosystems that you can plug in that make your existing ecosystem very, very efficient. The last point I'm going to make on this bullet point is what differentiates us. I've talked about that a lot. One of these small businesses has going for it in America today, and I think in the world today. And regardless of the industry, whether it's CPG, whether it's content, whatever it is, small businesses are usually more innovative because we have a lot. You still have that energy, that drive, or what I like to describe as the founding drive of America, right? Where you feel like the world, you can make anything happen just if you work hard at it, which is the way I would describe the American dream, even though there's a lot more to it. But innovation is what gives us a fighting chance in a very, very brutal landscape that is CPG. African superfoods I mentioned earlier. I share the love is something that is very important to me, is very important to my faith. And by share the love, we mean how we have a social impact in the communities in which we work. We do that in 4 major ways. I'm just going to talk about 3. One of them is our farmers. We have something we call shared prosperity and integrity of purpose. Because for me as an African immigrant, I've seen how many communities grow foods that have made billionaires in the world, and those communities stay poor generationally. For example, cacao. Some people call it cacao, we call it cocoa in Nigeria. That's what you use to make chocolate. 70% of the world's chocolate is made by 4 African countries I like to call the SINC countries, SINC with a C. That's Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Ghana. You have 80% of the farmers in these regions who have never tasted chocolate.
Wow.
And who are generationally poor. So for me as an American, and also as an African immigrant, it was important to me to begin to make a dent in how we're sharing prosperity, which is why when I started my presentation, I talked about creating value and retaining value. Very, very more often than not, a lot of small businesses, a lot of communities of color, a lot of immigrant societies and countries create a ton of value, but don't get to retain that value. It's an incredibly important thing I think businesses need to focus on at the beginning. And you ask me, what has all of this got to do with AWS? If you're not able to secure your data, access that data, mine that data, you're not able to make good decisions. You're not able to make timely decisions. So that takes care of a very, very important part of the ecosystem within which we play that allows us begin to go fight in the other areas. So I'm going to move on a little bit. If you have any questions, Sebastian, please jump in.
Oh, sure. One thing I really like that you talked about, going back to connecting you and Vanessa, not just about security and data, but also how it impacts the community. Because we have people and countries that are sourcing supplies that you need, but what about how it hits home to people in the household and your impact on community and your impact on the politics? And so you're like multi-dimensional. It's just not about security. It ties into what we want to do. How do you give back? So can you talk about that and the impact on the community?
So I'm going to link how we've used data to make decisions that has had not just a business impact, strategic impact, but also a social impact.
Exactly.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, that is.
All right. So one of the products we do a lot of is hibiscus. If you've had passion tea at Starbucks, you've had hibiscus. If you've had, when you dip your tea bag in your hot water and it has this cranberry-like color, that's hibiscus that is giving that color. So hibiscus is prevalent in all our lives. It's used as a food dye. It's used in many ways. The best variety grows in Nigeria, also Egypt. So one of the things we've done is, in terms of how we use our inventory data, is even get better at being able to predict what the farming yield is going to be, and that is more intense than it sounds. In order to predict what the farming yield is going to be, it takes a lot of sometimes 10-year history of data. We're not just plugging in a 10-year history of data of the farm yields. We're looking at climate change. We're looking at the pricing over the last 5 years. So what we've done for example, this year we had an opportunity to do over 100 containers of hibiscus. Each container is about, hibiscus, because it's bulky, is about 26,000 pounds in weight. But we couldn't do a lot of that because of the supply chain challenges and just because of our inability last year to be able to properly predict how much we're going to need, how much inventory we're going to need. So what have we done this year? Because we're just better at data, is we've begun to work more closely with the farmers, and that is the social impact part of it.
Exactly.
So we provide funding, even though we're a small business, we provide funding for fertilizer. We provide funding for the seedling that they're going to use to plant. We provide funding for even things as grant that have nothing to do with farming. For example, education. In the region where they grow cassava, it's not, hibiscus. Cassava is obviously in my mind. I meant hibiscus. It's not unusual for a lot of the children not to go to school. And when the parents have to make a decision about who gets to go to school, the girls usually stay home. Because the idea is that the girls are going to get married and that value of education is going to belong to a third party, another man. So of course the boys get to go to school. And I know that doesn't make sense, but to these communities, it makes sense. So part of what we do is say, if we provide you with funding for seedlings or for fertilizer, we support you a little bit, will you let your daughters go to school? Because it makes life easier. It just shows you how much impact being able to have a more efficient business can have on not just a small business, but can have in the communities in which they play, or the communities that are important to the social impact strategy aspect of it. So I'm not sure if you got the full
You got it, because
Perfect.
As you're explaining it kind of goes back to why Vanessa wanted to start Lives at.
Yeah.
It's not just helping small businesses.
Yeah.
It's helping small businesses in communities,
Yeah.
Yes.
in STEM education, and people of color,
Yeah.
and girls that have an example such as you. So I like the connection
Yeah.
between what we're doing and the cascading effect on societies around the globe, actually,
Yeah.
is what
Right.
you're working on. So thank you.
I like the way you describe it because, a lot of times people will say climbing a ladder. I like to describe it as a circle because it is an ecosystem. And when you're a small business, even when you're a big business, you don't do everything on your own. So I like to describe it as a circle. So what happens is if one significant part of that circle is made more efficient, guess what? It has a multiplier effect on every aspect. So, because I'm sure when AWS came up, thinking that the capabilities you allow us to access allows us impact a farmer somewhere in Nigeria, or
Yes.
allows us impact a little girl somewhere in Nigeria. But it is a circle, and it does impact the communities we work in, and that's one of the things I am incredibly proud of because I'm one person. I'm a small business, so you never think of yourself as having significant impact as one person or small business, but we are having impact that is meaningful, that is real, that is trackable, and that you can see the actual results. And that's something that is really important to us as a small business as well.
Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so I think I already touched on a lot of this stuff, the business growth. For me, it boils down to decision making. I'm not a tech person. I understand data, but I'm focused on food. I get in my kitchen, I create new products. So to have the opportunity to plug in to a system that makes this so much more easier for us, and where they're hand-holding, let me move to that slide, where there's a lot of hand-holding. I cannot tell you the amount of patience Vanessa has had in walking us through not just how to plug into the AWS, what I call the AWS ecosystem. That's how I call it at work. I call everything an ecosystem. She's had a lot of patience. It's expansive, it's integrated, it's hand-holding, to be honest, in helping us plug into the AWS ecosystem in a way that is meaningful to what we do specifically as a CPG food industry. And that's one of the things that I think took me by surprise, because the reality is they don't have to care, right? They can have impact in other areas. They don't have to take this seriously as she does. What she does, she takes it and is a very layer by layer, step by step support in actually maximizing the capabilities and the benefits of AWS. That's why it was important to me to point that out, because For a small business that is running day to day, you mentioned AWS. Even though they know they need it, it means nothing if they don't have that support in order to be able to plug in. So having that support has been really instrumental in making progress in how we're plugged into AWS and how we use AWS.
Well, I'm definitely glad you're using AWS. And as a small business and a startup,
Yeah.
because as Vanessa said, in security, you're wearing lots of hats.
Yeah.
And so maybe engaging a company that has great services and products, what advice would you give other small businesses like to get started? Don't be intimidated. We have people like Vanessa here to help you. What are some words of encouragement to help them take the next step in security practices?
So I like to approach it in a way. Remember when I talked about functionality and anything you're presenting to the world, whether it's a food, whether it's a service, you have to make sure it's instinctive or relatable to the person you're talking to. So one of the ways I like to think about it is I always, when I talk to businesses or even my employees and I want to talk to them about implementing something or plugging into something or taking advantage of something, we always start from the end goal. So that's how I would talk to small businesses and say, what is your end goal? You're creating value if you're innovating. Whatever service or product you're doing, you are creating value. You want to make sure you can retain that value, not just in the short term, in the medium term, but in the long term, but also be able to pivot, be able to adapt, be able to learn, be able to use all of that data to just grow your business so that as a 40-man army, probably 40-man is an exaggeration, like a 4-man army, which is what most small businesses really are, you're able to compete with the bigger businesses. When we identify those goals, and I can simplify by saying you want to create value, you want to retain that value. We then begin to kind of break that apart and say data is an important part of creating value and retaining value. So the question then becomes when you're thinking about AWS or you're thinking about being a part of this program or you're thinking about data, I understand that there's so many other things that feel fires that you feel you need to put up right now, but it's very, very important to have DNA security as part of the DNA of the founding of your business. Because all of that value you're creating, all of that innovation you're doing, that's where you house it, that's where you're able to access it, and that's where you're able to build on. But that's where I start with. I start from the end goal of being able to plug into an AWS and what that does for the business, not just in the immediate term, but in the long term. I think a lot of businesses I've spoken to, that resonates with them because they're thinking about their business. They don't wake up in the morning and think, oh my God, I wish I had AWS today. Nobody, you're thinking, how do I meet this purchase order? I need 10 ingredients. One is, I'm missing one. How do I get that? But then I can tell them, but if you had proper access to your data, you would have known that ingredient is likely to be out.
Yes.
You would have known which one of your products customers are gravitating toward. So therefore, you build more products on top of that, and you fortify your business, especially in today's world where you have massive, big companies who are going out of stock due to supply chain challenges. Can you imagine how much more damaging that is to small businesses? I think something close to 67% of startups in my industry closed during COVID. If data is not just useful for long term, but it's actually very predictive, if you're able to use that data very well and you just make better decisions that help your business grow. So I always start from that, creating value, retaining value, and business growth, and we work our way down back to why you need to secure your data and put your data in a place where you can access it and make better decisions as a small company and to compete more effectively, actually.
Just going back to Vanessa, we're talking about the importance of data and small businesses and startups surviving. At the beginning of the talk, you shared some stats on small businesses that don't survive doing something or not having security. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What's the impact on a community when they don't have proper security or business processes?
Well, the impact of the community is when, and it's like, okay, I use my uncle's business, for example. If they don't have the appropriate security around their customers' data, they lose that customer because they had a breach, for example. When they lose a customer, then they lose money off from their table, because that's related to food. So that's less money on the table to eat, right? for their kids to eat. And that impacts the community because they do feel it. I mean, they go to school in that community, the children, and when they know that something had detrimentally happened to their parents' business, then that kid, their friends are upset too. So it does have an impact. And then it's cyclical, right? They become depressed about their friend. And then other people in the community see, okay, so they failed. What did they do wrong, right? And then what can they do right? How can I help them secure that so that won't happen to them in the future? So that's one example. But at a larger scale, when it comes to community losing a business, and I hate to, what comes to mind, what happened in Buffalo, it impacts the whole community. That was a store, but it impacted the whole community because it's now like, are they another food desert? You know, so that's impactful. That was a terrible breach of security, but it still was security related. So when it's a loaded question you ask when it comes to security and data, and not just security of data, but even the security of people, and that's physical security. That's huge. It impacts the community at a conscious level and a subconscious level. And in every generation, from the kid I talked about earlier with, their friend, they knew my uncle, something happened to his data, but it also impacts other generations, the adults too. So it impacts the whole community as a whole, especially the Black, Latino, and Native American communities, because it's so closely knit. Everyone knows what everyone is doing. It's like the telephone, the telephone. Everybody knows what so-and-so is doing, even from one house to the other. I remember growing up, you couldn't get down the street before somebody already knew what you did when you were up the street, because someone told on you. So that's the way I see it.
Great, thank you. And just going back to something that you talked about, Toin, it was how your mother expressed love, and then how you express love to your children.
Yeah.
And then being in the kitchen and being very meticulous and Power Foods, and now you have manufacturing plants, and you're going to other global society sourcing food. Yeah. So you've been rocking and rolling over the last several years. So what's the next steps for Iya Food with AWS?
That's actually a really good question. I think we were speaking earlier, and because of my background in private equity, I'm very familiar with exit strategies. I don't like that term, but that's the right term. Where as a business like ours, the way you're growing, you're either acquired by a big company, or you do an IPO. I would love to do an IPO because we talked about how representation matters, right? It's not just a great thing for my business, but it's just great to do it, right? To be a Black woman-owned business and to do a successful IPO with a CPG food industry that actually produces good food. So we're creating value for not just customers, which is number one, but we're creating value in terms of just the diversity in that particular ecosystem. And it still brings it back to value creation, value retention, and data. When you are thinking about the valuation of your company, whether it's for an acquisition or private equity investment or funding, or you're thinking about doing an IPO, you really have to start to pay attention to data right off the bat. Because it is that data that you build, and it feeds into an important part of your company valuation. Data equity is the blood of which equity runs is data, especially when you're in CPG. So that's why I like the question, because it gives me an opportunity to kind of tie it back together to the value of the company you're creating, which in this case is a literal sense, the valuation of your company. So that's something I'm very focused on, to make sure that we can maximize the valuation of our company. So when the time comes for an IPO, we can be successful and show the world what a Black woman-owned business can do in the stock market.
We'll be looking out for it.
Yes.
And I can't wait to try the brownies either.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way, Vanessa. I think we started Lives when you kind of knocked on my door and said, Sebastian, will you help me? that
I
you're working
remember
with
that.
hard and getting funding and things such as that, and finding DiscoveredTV and Iya Foods. It's just been such a short period of time helping one organization, actually two, and the impact of community and security and data. This is a long list of things that we've accomplished in such a short period of time. So given this, for Lives at, what is your vision on expanding the program?
Well, I've been talking internally to some of my colleagues. Some of the ways we're tending on expanding it is throughout the Americas and also even throughout Latin America, South America. Also, we're expanding out into Africa as well. So I have a colleague, we've been talking on how do we create a pipeline. And I would like to also call to action today to those individuals. If you're interested in securing your startup or your small to medium-sized business, please reach out to me, Jackovan at Amazon.com. Or you can even contact Sebastian. That would be my call to action. So we're creating a large pipeline because we're learning a lot of reoccurring themes. And Toyin mentioned earlier, analytics of data, predictive data, AI, ML of that data. It's getting very, very crucial for startups to and small businesses to compete and also to thrive and to grow. So as big as that pipeline grows, then that end result is those startups grow and those startups become IPOs on Wall Street. So that's my vision. It's a high vision, a broad one, but I believe that AWS and counterparts that I have in AWS will provide that support because they provided that support when they had a lot of work on their plate and their bandwidth was so small, but yet they still supported my vision in this effort to have Toyin sitting here today. So I would like to see more Toyin sitting here today, as well as educating and upskilling our communities more on cloud computing, which we're doing. When we have another program that's doing that, that will reach out to HBCUs, that will reach out to communities where they don't have access to internet to educate them on what the cloud is. And we're starting a vlog as well to educate people about security in plain, simple English, right? You know, and even to really what is encryption, for example. And some people were like, that word, but I want to break it down to a very basic bites to where they understand it. I think Einstein had said this, and I could be wrong, but if you could take something complex and make it simple, that's genius, right? I'm not a genius, but I just do it because it's easier. Right? You want to simplify so it could be easier, so it could be scalable. And when that knowledge is scalable in our communities, that's going to change the world. Just think about it. All those of what people would think third world countries won't exist anymore because it's all going to be about the power of the intellect and the power of what you can do on the cloud platform.
Thank you, Vanessa. So for our professional services colleagues that are out there and hopefully listening to our recording, so professional services, again, what can a ProServe person do to help us? Just one more time, can you tell us?
Just one more time, they can reach out to us at Lives at AWS to support our endeavors and to support these programs. And also, if they know of other businesses that can utilize our services and support, bring them too, so we can collectively make a difference in our communities. Because remember, the American dream of why every immigrant has come here and other people who've been here and are working like, us, our generations, that still is the American dream. And we all can eat. with that American dream.
Thank you, Vanessa. So we'll pause for questions and answers from our audience here. Have any questions for us?
Okay. Oh, I should have said that. Consumer packaged goods. So if it's packaged and it's for consumers, that's a CPG. So you do have it in food, you have it in cosmetics, you have it in household cleaning. It's consumer packaged goods.
Good question. How many years that people who have participated have been in our program? It has varied. Some have been in business for 5 years, and then some have been in business for 3 years. And then we have another business in the pipeline that's been in 7 years. So it's different. One of the main common denominators between them all is that they're doing more into the cloud. They want, and if they already are doing some business in the cloud, they want to understand what their cloud service providers are doing. They want to revisit some of those contracts that they have with them and to shore those up and make it better. So it varies the tenure. And I like more, to me personally, I think 1 year, the sooner the better, because if you have that solid foundation and security is foundational, you can, just skyrocket to concentrate on what's important, and that's getting your product to market, right?
Great. Thank you, Vanessa. Any other questions? Well, with that, I will say thank you, Toyin, for working with us and sharing your story and its community impact and sourcing from around the globe and packaging and sharing love with your family and becoming a legacy. So we appreciate that. And Vanessa, thank you for having the vision for Lives so we can have discussions such as this and how ProServe and AWS is making a difference in the world. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to quickly correct my email. It's my first name at Iya Foods. So in case you email this one, it's going to bounce back. Just Toyin at Iya Foods if you want to email me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.